The morning sun cast long shadows across Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch as he sat alone in his private study. Outside, the familiar sounds of children's laughter echoed from the amusement park he'd built, but inside these walls, silence pressed down like a weight. It was June 2009, and the world knew him as a king of pop, but very few knew the burden he carried in his heart that particular morning. A single envelope lay on his mahogany desk, its edges worn from being handled repeatedly over the past 3 days. The handwriting on the front was childish, unsteady, the letters formed by a hand that clearly struggled with the simple task of holding a pen. Michael reached for it again, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled out the letter inside. He'd read it dozens of times, yet each word still hit him with the force of a physical blow. Dear Mr. Jackson, it began, "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 9 years old, and I'm writing to you from Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. The nurses here helped me write this because my hands don't work so good anymore. I have something called muscular dystrophy, and the doctors say I don't have much time left. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because of my little brother, Danny. He's 6, and he has the same thing I have. The doctors say there's a treatment that could save him, something new that's being tested in Germany. But it costs so much money, and my parents have already spent everything trying to help me. I heard you help children, Mr. Jackson. I'm not asking you to save me. I know it's too late for that. But Danny still has a chance. He's the best little brother in the whole world. He shares his toys, and he never gets mad, and he tells the funniest jokes that don't make any sense. Please, Mr. Jackson, I don't want my mom and dad to lose both of us. I don't want Danny to end up like me. If you can help him, I promise I'll watch over him from heaven and make sure he grows up to be a good person. Love, Sarah." Michael's vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. He'd received thousands of letters from sick children over the years. He'd visited hospitals, funded treatments, brought joy to countless young lives facing impossible circumstances. But something about Sarah's letter cut deeper than all the others. Perhaps it was the selflessness of a dying child thinking only of a brother's survival. Perhaps it was the echo of his own childhood, stolen away by fame and fortune, that made him understand the precious nature of youth. Whatever the reason, he knew in that moment that this would be his mission, possibly his last great act before embarking on the comeback tour that would define his legacy. He picked up his phone and dialed his longtime manager, Frank Dilio. The conversation was brief but intense. Michael wanted every detail about Sarah Mitchell, about her brother Danny, about the experimental treatment in Germany, and about the family situation. Within hours, his team had compiled a comprehensive file. The experimental gene therapy treatment cost nearly $2 million, not including travel, accommodation, and ongoing care. The Mitchell family had exhausted their insurance, sold their home, and were living in a small apartment near the hospital. Sarah's father had taken 3 jobs, while her mother never left the children's sides. But the most heartbreaking detail was buried in the medical reports. Sarah had perhaps 3 weeks left. The disease had progressed rapidly, attacking her respiratory muscles, and her latest scans showed her heart was beginning to fail. Danny, however, was in the early stages. If they could get him into the treatment program soon, his chances of survival were estimated at 70%. Every week that passed reduced those odds. Michael stood and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling grounds of Neverland. He'd built this place as a sanctuary, a realm where childhood could exist forever, untouched by the cruelty and darkness of the real world. Yet here was a stark reminder that outside these gates, children suffered in ways that no amount of Ferris wheels or zoo animals could remedy. He thought about his own children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, healthy and safe, their biggest worry being which ride to go on next. The unfairness of it all made his chest tighten with rage and sorrow. His tour was set to begin in just weeks. 50 shows at London's O2 Arena, a grueling schedule that would test every limit of his 50-year-old body. His rehearsals were already punishing, his energy reserves depleting faster than they had in his younger years. The pressure from promoters, investors, and millions of ticket holders was immense. Any deviation from plan would trigger a cascade of legal and financial consequences. Yet as he stood there, holding Sarah's letter in his hand, none of that seemed to matter. Michael made his decision. He would go to that hospital. He would meet Sarah and Danny. He would look into their parents' eyes and make them a promise that he intended to keep, regardless of the cost. The money was the easy part. He'd liquidate whatever assets necessary. But he wanted to give them something more than just financial support. He wanted to give them hope, to let Sarah know that her brother would live, that a sacrifice of writing that letter would mean something profound. He called his assistant and instructed her to clear his schedule for the following day. There would be no rehearsals, no meetings, no obligations except one. He was going to meet the Mitchell family, and he was going to tell a dying little girl that she had just saved her brother's life. As he prepared to leave his study, Michael glanced at a photograph on his desk, himself as a young boy, performing with his brothers, a forced smile on his face hiding the exhaustion and fear beneath. He understood what it meant to be a child robbed of normalcy. He would not let Danny Mitchell suffer the same fate, for entirely different reasons. This mission had become personal, and Michael Jackson never did anything halfway when his heart was truly engaged. The black SUV pulled up to the children's hospital just after dawn, before the morning rush of staff and visitors could create a scene. Michael sat in the back seat, wearing a simple surgical mask and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His chief of security, a former Marine named Marcus Webb, turned from the front passenger seat with concerned expression. "Michael, the media is going to find out eventually. You know that, right? Once word spreads that you're here, this place will be surrounded within an hour." Michael nodded slowly. "I know, Marcus. But some things are more important than avoiding cameras. Just give me time with the family first. That's all I ask." They coordinated with the hospital administration, who agreed to provide a private conference room and ensure complete discretion. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the head of pediatric neurology, met them at a side entrance. She was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes that had witnessed too much suffering, yet somehow retained their warmth. "Mr. Jackson, thank you for coming," she said, extending her hand. "Sarah has been asking about you constantly since you sent that letter. She didn't actually think you'd receive it, let alone respond. This is going to mean everything to her." "How is she?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen's expression shifted, becoming more clinical, more guarded. "She's declining faster than we anticipated. Her oxygen saturation drops whenever we try to wean her off the ventilator. Her heart rate has become irregular. Honestly, Mr. Jackson, I'm surprised she's held on this long. It's as if she's waiting for something." The word struck Michael like a punch to the gut. Sarah was waiting. She was holding on to life with whatever strength remained in her failing body because she needed to know her letter had reached him, that her brother would be saved. The weight of that responsibility settled onto his shoulders like a physical burden. They walked through sterile hallways that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Michael had been in dozens of hospitals over the years, visiting sick children, bringing gifts and smiles to brighten their darkest days. But this felt different. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a charitable appearance. This was personal. This was a promise he was about to make to a dying child, and he would move heaven and earth to keep it. Sarah's room was at the end of the pediatric intensive care unit. Through the small window in the door, Michael could see a tiny figure in the bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, keeping her fragile body functioning. Beside her sat a woman with dark circles under her eyes and gray streaks in her brown hair that probably hadn't been there a year ago. This was Jennifer Mitchell, Sarah's mother, who looked up as Dr. Chen knocked softly on the door. The transformation on Jennifer's face when she saw Michael was something he would never forget. Disbelief, hope, gratitude, and overwhelming relief crashed over her features in waves. She stood quickly, her hand covering her mouth as tears began streaming down her cheeks. "Mr. Jackson," she whispered, as if saying his name any louder might shatter the reality of his presence. Michael stepped into the room, pulling down his mask so Sarah could see his face. The little girl was awake, her eyes large and bright despite the weakness ravaging her body. She had tubes running from her nose and arms, and the ventilator beside her bed breathed for her with rhythmic precision. But when she saw him, her face lit up with pure joy. "You came," she mouthed, unable to speak around the breathing tube. Michael approached her bedside, kneeling down so he was at eye level with her. He took her small, cold hand in his, feeling how light and fragile it was, like holding a baby bird. "Of course I came, Sarah. Your letter was the most beautiful thing I've ever read. You're an incredible big sister, and I'm here to tell you something very important." He paused, making sure she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Danny is going to be okay. I promise you, he's going to get the treatment he needs. He's going to grow up strong and healthy, and is going to tell his own children about his amazing sister who saved his life. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that rolled down her temples into her hair. Her mother sobbed quietly in the corner, her hand still covering her mouth, unable to process the miracle unfolding before her. "Where's Danny now?" Michael asked Jennifer. "He's in the playroom down the hall. My husband, Tom, is with him." We didn't tell Danny about Sarah's letter or about the treatment because we didn't want to get his hopes up. We had so many disappointments, so many doors closed in our faces. Michael stood and turned to Dr. Chen. "I want to meet Danny, and I need you to contact a research facility in Germany immediately. Tell them we'll need a spot in their program within the week. Money is no object. Whatever they need, whatever we need to do, make it happen." Dr. Chen nodded, already pulling out a phone to begin making calls. Michael then addressed Marcus, who stood guard by the door. "I need you to coordinate with my financial team. Liquidate whatever assets necessary to cover the full cost of treatment, plus a trust fund for the family. And I want the Mitchell family moved into a furnished home near the hospital immediately, something comfortable where they can stay together." Marcus nodded and stepped into the hallway to begin executing the orders. Michael returned his attention to Sarah, who was watching him with an expression of peaceful contentment that broke his heart. "I want you to rest now. Sweetheart," he said softly. "You've been so brave, fighting so hard. You've saved your brother. You've done everything you needed to do. Now it's okay to let go of all that worry. Danny is going to be fine. Your mom and dad are going to be fine. You can rest." Sarah's hand squeezed his with surprising strength, and she shook her head slightly. With tremendous effort, she pulled the ventilator mask aside just enough to whisper for words that would haunt Michael forever. "Let me see him." She wanted to see Danny one more time. She wanted to see her brother, knowing he would live, before she allowed herself to surrender to the inevitable. Michael looked at Jennifer, who was crying openly now, and then at Dr. Chen, who nodded with understanding. "I'll bring him," Dr. Chen said, leaving the room quickly. Michael stayed beside Sarah, holding her hand, humming softly the melody of "You Are Not Alone." He'd written that song years ago, never imagining he'd be singing it to a dying child who was anything but alone in her final days. Around him, the machines continued their vigil, tracking heartbeats and oxygen levels, measuring the slow departure of life from this small, brave body. Minutes later, the door opened, and a small boy entered, his eyes wide with confusion and wonder. Danny Mitchell was tiny for 6 years old, his muscles already showing signs of the disease that would have claimed him without intervention. He had the same bright eyes as his sister, the same determined chin. He wore a superhero t-shirt and carried a stuffed dinosaur under one arm. Behind him came a tall man with a weathered face and callous hands, Tom Mitchell, who worked 3 jobs trying to save children he was slowly losing. When Tom saw Michael Jackson in his daughter's hospital room, his legs nearly gave out beneath him. "Sarah." Danny rushed to his sister's bedside, seemingly unaware of the famous stranger in the room. "I drew you a picture of a dragon. Dad said dragons are super strong and they never get sick." Sarah's face transformed with love as she looked at her little brother. Michael gently released her hand and stepped back, giving the siblings a moment together. Danny climbed onto a chair beside the bed, chattering about his dragon drawing, about a joke he'd heard, about how he'd learned to tie his shoes all by himself. Michael watched them together, and in that moment, he understood why Sarah had held on so desperately. She needed this. She needed to see Danny one last time, to hear his voice, to memorize his face. She needed to know that when she let go, he would continue on without her, growing and learning and living the life she would never have. After several minutes, Michael approached Danny gently. "Hey there, Danny. My name is Michael. I'm a friend of your sister's." Danny looked up at him, recognition flickering across his young face. "You're the guy from the music videos. Sarah loves your songs. Well, I love your sister too. She's one of the bravest people I've ever met. And you know what? In a few days, you're going to go on an A-plane to a special hospital in Germany, where some very smart doctors are going to make you feel much better." Danny's eyes widened. "Will Sarah come too?" The room fell silent. Sarah reached out and touched her brother's arm, shaking her head slightly. Danny's face crumpled with understanding beyond his years. "But I want you to get better too," he whispered. "I am better, Danny," Sarah mouthed. "I'm getting all better, and I'm going to watch you from the clouds. You're going to be so strong and so fast, and you're going to do all the things we talked about. Remember? You're going to climb mountains and swim in the ocean, and maybe even be an astronaut." Michael had to turn away, his own tears threatening to overwhelm him. Behind him, Tom and Jennifer held each other, their grief and gratitude intertwining in a way that defied description. This was why he'd come. This was why none of the tools or the fame or the money mattered in comparison. In this room, in this moment, he was witnessing the purest form of love that existed, the love of a sister sacrificing everything for her brother's future. The next 72 hours became a whirlwind of frantic activity that pushed everyone involved to their absolute limits. Michael had returned to Neverland only long enough to cancel 3 weeks of rehearsals, triggering panic among tour promoters who threatened lawsuits and financial catastrophe. His manager, Frank Dillio, had spent 2 hours arguing that the tour was contractually obligated to proceed, that millions of dollars hung in the balance, that investors were already threatening to pull out. Michael had listened quietly to the entire rant before saying simply, "A little girl is dying, Frank. She's dying, and her brother needs to be in Germany by this weekend or he might die too. I don't care about the tour. I don't care about the lawsuits. Cancel whatever you need to cancel. This is happening." The silence on the other end of the line had been profound. Finally, Frank had sighed deeply and said, "Okay, Michael, we'll figure it out. We always do." Meanwhile, Dr. Chen had been working around the clock to coordinate with the research facility in Munich. The experimental treatment program was overseen by Dr. Klaus Hermann, a brilliant geneticist who had developed a revolutionary gene therapy specifically targeting the genetic mutations that cause muscular dystrophy. The treatment was in Phase 2 trials, showing remarkable success rates, but it was available only to a select few patients due to its experimental nature and astronomical cost. Dr. Hermann had been initially skeptical when Dr. Chen called, assuming this was another wealthy family trying to buy their way into the program without proper medical evaluation. But when he learned that Michael Jackson was personally funding the treatment and that time was critically short, his tone had changed. "Send me all of Danny's medical records immediately," Dr. Hermann had said in his thick German accent. "I need complete genetic sequencing, muscle biopsy results, cardiac function tests, everything. If it's a good candidate, I can make room for him, but we must move quickly. The earlier we intervene, the better the outcomes." Dr. Chen had worked through the night compiling every test result, every scan, every piece of data that existed on Danny Mitchell's condition. She'd even ordered additional tests to fill gaps in the medical history. Michael had hired the best medical courier service in the country to hand-deliver the records to Germany via private jet, ensuring they'd reach Dr. Hermann within 24 hours. But even as these plans unfolded, everyone involved understood the cruel reality. Sarah was fading fast. Her body was shutting down system by system, and Dr. Chen privately told Michael that she doubted Sarah would survive another week. The question became whether Danny could reach Germany while his sister was still alive to know he was safe. Michael found himself spending every spare moment at the hospital. He'd arrive before dawn and stay until the nurses insisted he leave. He sat with Sarah when she was awake, holding her hand and telling her stories about his travels, about the strange and wonderful things he'd seen around the world. He described the Eiffel Tower in Paris, the pyramids in Egypt, the Aurora Borealis in Norway. He wanted to give her glimpses of a world she'd never get to see herself. When Danny goes to Germany, he told her one evening, he's going to see castles, real ones, just like in fairy tales, and is going to ride on trains that go so fast, everything outside the window turns into a blur. He is going to eat chocolate that tastes better than anything you can imagine, and is going to meet people who speak a different language, and is going to be so brave, just like his big sister. Sarah couldn't respond much anymore. The ventilator now breathed for her completely, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. But whenever Michael spoke, her eyes would focus on his face, and he could see she was listening, absorbing every word. During those long hours at the hospital, Michael also got to know the Mitchell family more deeply. Tom, Sarah's father, was a man who had been broken and rebuilt so many times that he carried his grief like armor. He worked as construction supervisor during the day, drove for a rideshare company in the evenings, and did overnight stocking at a warehouse. He slept maybe 4 hours a night, usually in a chair beside Sarah's bed. I kept thinking I could work hard enough to save them, Tom told Michael one night when they were alone in the hospital cafeteria. I thought if I just made enough money, found the right doctor, knocked on enough doors, I could fix this. But you can't fix genetics. You can't work harder than DNA. And watching them suffer while being completely powerless, it's destroyed me in ways I'll never recover from. Michael understood that feeling more than Tom knew. He'd spent his entire life trying to control things that were ultimately beyond his control, trying to create a perfect world when the real world was messy and cruel. You didn't fail them, Tom. You being the father they needed. Sarah wrote that letter because she's watched you fight so hard for them. She learned her courage from you. Jennifer Mitchell was different from her husband. Where Tom carried his grief as rage against the unfairness of fate, Jennifer had transformed her suffering into a kind of transcendent grace. She spent every moment with her children, never showing them fear or despair. She read to them, sang to them, made them laugh even as her heart shattered. Michael watched her one afternoon help Danny with a coloring book while Sarah slept, and he realized he was witnessing the strongest person he'd ever met. "How do you do it?" he asked her. "How do you smile for them when everything is falling apart?" Jennifer looked at him with eyes that held depths of sorrow he couldn't fathom. "Because they need me to. Because if I break down, they'll be scared. I can fall apart later. Right now, I need to be their mom, and that means making them feel safe and loved until the very end. There will be time for grief afterward. There's always time for grief." On the 4th day after Sarah's letter had reached him, Michael received the call he'd been desperately waiting for. Dr. Herman had reviewed all of Danny's records and confirmed he was an excellent candidate for the gene therapy program. Moreover, Dr. Herman had pulled strings to arrange for Danny to begin treatment immediately upon arrival in Munich. Everything was in place. The private medical jet was chartered and ready. The treatment facility had prepared a suite for the Mitchell family. All that remained was a departure itself. But there was a problem, one that Tom and Jennifer couldn't bring themselves to voice. If they left now with Danny, Sarah would die alone. If they stayed with Sarah until the end, Danny might deteriorate past a point where the treatment would be effective. It was an impossible choice, the kind that no parent should ever have to make. Michael understood their dilemma before they said a word. He saw it in their faces, in the way they looked at each other with silent agony. That evening, he asked to speak with them privately. "I'll stay with Sarah," he said simply. "You take Danny to Germany. Get him into that program. Save your son. I promise you, Sarah will not be alone. I will be right here beside her every single moment. I will hold her hand and talk to her and make sure she knows she's loved. And I'll call you immediately if anything changes. You have my word." Jennifer began crying, shaking her head. "Mr. Jackson, we can't ask you to do that. She's our daughter. We should be the ones." "You should be the one saving your son," Michael interrupted gently but firmly. "That's what Sarah wants. That's why she wrote that letter. She wants Danny to live, and he needs you with him in Germany. He needs his parents. Sarah needs to know that you're taking care of her brother. Let me do this for her. Let me do this for all of you." Tom stood abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jennifer looked between Michael and her husband, torn between two impossible choices. Finally, she nodded slowly, accepting the gift Michael was offering, even though it cost her everything to do so. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us permission to save our son." The next morning, Michael helped the Mitchell family prepare for their departure. Danny was confused about why they were leaving without Sarah, but his parents explained gently that she needed to stay in the hospital a little longer, and that Michael would keep her company. Danny made Michael promise to read Sarah his favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are, and to tell her about the airplane ride when they got back. Michael made that promise, knowing it was one he'd have to break. Danny would return from Germany alive and healthy, but Sarah would be gone. The little boy would have to learn that his sister had sacrificed everything so he could have a future. At the airport, Michael watched the Mitchell family board the private medical jet that would take them to Munich. He'd arranged for the best pediatric transport team to accompany them, ensuring Danny would be monitored throughout the journey. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Michael felt the weight of his promise settle fully onto his shoulders. He'd given them his word that Sarah would not die alone, and he intended to keep that promise, no matter what it cost him. He returned to the hospital and entered Sarah's room. She was asleep, her breathing managed entirely by machines, her small body barely making an impression under the white sheets. Michael pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her hand in his. "They are on their way," he told her softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Danny's going to Germany, and is going to get better. You did it, Sarah. You saved your brother. Now you can rest. I'm right here. You're not alone. I promise, you're not alone." The hospital room became Michael's entire world over the following days. He'd arranged for a small cot to be brought in, though he rarely used it. Most of his time was spent in the chair beside Sarah's bed, holding her hand, talking to her, playing music softly from his phone. He brought a small speaker and created a playlist of gentle songs, instrumentals mostly, pieces that filled the sterile room with warmth and life. The nursing staff had initially been skeptical about having a celebrity camping out in one of their patient rooms, but Michael's genuine devotion to Sarah quickly won them over. He learned all their names, asked about their families, and treated them with the same respect he showed everyone else. Night shift nurse Patricia Martinez, a grandmother of 5 who had been working in pediatrics for 30 years, told him on his third night that she'd never seen anyone so dedicated to a child who wasn't their own. "You're giving her a gift," Patricia said as she checked Sarah's vitals at 2 in the morning. "She's not alone. That's what every dying child fears most, being alone in the dark. But you're here, and she knows it. I can tell by her heart rate. It's more stable when you're talking to her." Michael found himself opening up to Sarah in ways he rarely did with anyone. In the quiet hours of the night, when the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm of beeping monitors and hushed footsteps, he told her things he'd never spoken aloud before. He'd talk about his own childhood, about the loneliness of fame, about the weight of being the world's biggest star while feeling completely isolated. He told her about his dreams of creating a better world for children, of healing the planet, of spreading love and unity through music. "I always thought I could fix everything," he confessed one night around 3 a.m. "I thought if I just gave enough, loved enough, worked hard enough, I could make the world perfect. But I can't save everyone, Sarah. I couldn't even save you, and that breaks my heart in ways I can't explain. All I could do was save Danny. I hope that's enough. I hope you know that your sacrifice mattered more than anything I've ever done in my entire career." Dr. Chen visited regularly, checking Sarah's deteriorating condition with clinical efficiency that barely masked her emotional investment. On the 5th day of Michael's vigil, she pulled him aside in the hallway. "Michael, her organs are beginning to fail. Her kidneys have essentially stopped functioning, and her heart is becoming increasingly irregular. We're keeping her comfortable with medication, but realistically, she has maybe 48 hours left, possibly less. The family should know." Michael nodded, feeling the news settle into his bones like ice. He'd been calling Jennifer and Tom twice daily with updates. They were now in Munich, where Danny had begun the initial preparation phase for the gene therapy. The reports were promising. Danny was responding well to the preliminary treatments, and Dr. Herman was optimistic about his chances. Jennifer had cried with relief and guilt in equal measure during their last conversation. "He's going to make it," she'd sobbed over the phone. "Our baby boy is going to live. But Michael, how is Sarah? Please tell me the truth." Michael had told her the truth, that Sarah was declining but stable, that she seemed comfortable, that he was with her constantly. He couldn't bring himself to tell Jennifer that her daughter had days left, not while she was thousands of miles away with no ability to be in 2 places at once. What purpose would it serve except to cause anguish? On the 6th night of his vigil, Sarah woke up. It was surprising because she'd been mostly unconscious for the past 2 days, her body conserving whatever energy remained for the basic functions of survival. But around midnight, her eyes opened and focused directly on Michael with startling clarity. He leaned forward immediately. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm right here." Sarah's hand moved slightly in his, and her eyes traveled to the breathing tube. She wanted to speak. Michael looked around desperately for the nurse call button, but Sarah squeezed his hand insistently, shaking her head. She didn't want medical intervention. She wanted to communicate with him, now, in whatever way possible. Michael understood. He'd learned to read her expressions over the past days. "Danny's doing great," he said quickly. "The treatment is working. Dr. Herman says he's responding better than they hoped. Your brother is going to be completely healthy. Sarah, you saved him. You actually saved him." Tears rolled down Sarah's temples, but her expression was peaceful, almost joyful. She squeezed his hand again, and Michael realized she was trying to thank him. This dying 9-year-old girl was using her last reserves of strength to express gratitude to him. "No," Michael said, his own tears flowing freely now. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for teaching me what real courage looks like. Thank you for reminding me why any of this matters. You're the hero here, not me. I just made some phone calls and wrote some checks. You're the one who gave everything." Sarah's eyes moved toward the small table beside her bed, where Danny's dragon drawing was taped to the wall. Michael followed her gaze and understood what she wanted. "You want me to make sure Danny keeps drawing?" he asked. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I promise. I'll set up an art scholarship in your name. Danny can take all the art classes he wants, and so can other kids who love to draw. Your name will help creative children for years to come. Sarah Mitchell will mean something beautiful." Her eyes closed again, but the tiny smile on her lips told him she'd heard and understood. Michael continued holding her hand, talking softly about all the ways her brother would honor her memory, how the Mitchell family would heal and grow, how her courage would ripple outward in ways she couldn't imagine. As dawn broke on the 7th day, casting pale light through the hospital room window, Sarah's breathing began to change. Michael noticed it immediately and called for Dr. Chen, who arrived within minutes. She checked the monitors, then looked at Michael with sympathy. "It's time," she said quietly. "This is the beginning of the end. It could be minutes or hours, but her body is shutting down." Michael's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and called Jennifer Mitchell in Germany. It was afternoon there, and she answered on the first ring. "Michael? What's wrong? Is it Sarah?" "You need to say goodbye," he said, his voice cracking. "She's not going to make it much longer. I'm going to put the phone by her, Talk to her. Tell her everything you need to say." He heard Jennifer's strangled cry, heard Tom's voice in the background asking what was happening, heard the chaos of the hotel room in Munich as they processed the news they'd been dreading. Then Jennifer's voice came through, strong despite her tears. "Put me on speaker," she commanded, "and hold the phone where she can hear me clearly." Michael did as asked, positioning the phone near Sarah's ear. Jennifer's voice filled the quiet room. "Sarah, baby, it's Mommy. Daddy and Danny are here too. We want to tell you how much we love you, how proud we are of you. You've been the best daughter, the best sister, the best person we've ever known. You saved Danny, sweetheart. You saved your brother, and is going to live a wonderful life because of you. We're going to tell him stories about you every single day. He's never going to forget his amazing big sister." Tom's voice joined in, rough and broken. "Sarah, Princess, Daddy loves you so much. I'm sorry I couldn't fix this. I'm sorry I couldn't make you better. But you're not in pain anymore soon. Baby, you're going to be free and perfect and flying, and we'll see you again someday. I promise we'll see you again." Then, finally, Danny's small voice, not fully understanding but trying to be brave for his sister. "Sarah, I brought you another picture. It's a dragon and a princess together, and they are both super strong. Mr. Michael says I can keep drawing forever. I'm going to make you so many pictures, and Mom says you'll see all of them from heaven. I love you, Sarah. You're the best sister in the whole world." Michael watched Sarah's face as her family said goodbye from thousands of miles away. He saw peace settle over her features, saw her body relax as if releasing a burden she'd carried too long. The monitors began showing her heart rate slowing, her blood pressure dropping, all the clinical indicators of life's ending. "She can hear you," Michael said into the phone. "She knows you're there. Keep talking to her." And they did. For the next 20 minutes, the Mitchell family poured their love through a phone connection spanning continents, filling Sarah's final moments with the voices of everyone she cherished. Michael held her hand throughout, his thumb gently stroking her palm, his presence a physical anchor to the world she was leaving. When her heart finally stopped, it was quiet and peaceful. No dramatic gasping or struggle, just a gentle cessation, like a candle being softly extinguished. The monitors alarmed, but Dr. Chen silenced them immediately. Medical staff began entering the room, but Michael waved them back. He needed another moment, just one more moment with this brave little girl who'd taught him what truly mattered. "She's gone," he said softly into the phone. She went peacefully, surrounded by love. I was holding her hand. She wasn't alone. The sounds of grief from Germany were wrenching, but underneath the sorrow, Michael heard something else: gratitude. They'd been able to say goodbye. They'd been able to tell Sarah everything that mattered. And they knew she died knowing Danny would live. After ending the call, Michael sat with Sarah's body for another hour, not ready to leave her yet. He thought about the randomness of fate, how his fame and fortune had intersected with his family's tragedy in a way that saved one child while losing another. He thought about all the performances he'd given, all the records he'd sold, all the accolades he'd received, and realized that none of it mattered as much as this moment. He'd kept his promise. Sarah had not died alone. Finally, he stood and gently kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me be here," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me what heroism really looks like. Rest now, sweet girl. Your work is done." As he left the hospital that morning, the sun was fully risen, casting golden light across the city. Michael felt fundamentally changed by the experience, as if something inside him had broken open and been reformed. He'd witnessed the purest form of love and sacrifice, and it had altered his understanding of what his own life meant. He didn't know then that he had only weeks left to live himself. He didn't know that his own heart would soon fail, that his story would end abruptly and controversially, leaving the world to debate his legacy forever. But he knew that in this mission, in saving Danny Mitchell and honoring Sarah's sacrifice, he'd done something that transcended all the noise and controversy that surrounded his life. He'd answered a dying child's letter, and in doing so, had discovered what it truly meant to make a difference. 3 weeks after Sarah's death, Michael Jackson died at his home in Los Angeles. The world erupted in shock and grief, with millions mourning the loss of the king of pop. News coverage dominated every channel, analyzing his music, his controversies, his bizarre life, his mysterious death. The media circus followed was predictable and overwhelming, with speculation and scandal drowning out almost everything else. But in a small chapel in Los Angeles, a private funeral was being held for a 9-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell. The service was attended by family, a few close friends, hospital staff who'd cared for her, and one unexpected guest who arrived quietly through a side entrance. It was Frank Dilio, Michael Jackson's manager, carrying a letter in his hand. Tom and Jennifer Mitchell looked up in surprise as Frank approached them before the service began. He looked exhausted and grief-stricken, having just dealt with his own loss of Michael, but he'd insisted on being there. "Michael wanted you to have this," Frank said, handing Tom the envelope. "He wrote it the night after Sarah died. He was going to give it to you in person when you returned from Germany, but—" His voice trailed off, the reality of Michael's death still too raw to articulate fully. Tom opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter in Michael's distinctive flowing script, along with legal documents that would change the Mitchell family's life forever. "Dear Tom, Jennifer, and Danny," the letter began, "by the time you read this, Sarah will be at peace, and I hope Danny is well on his way to full recovery. I wanted to write down some thoughts while they are still fresh in my mind, because sitting with Sarah during her final days changed me in profound ways. She taught me that real heroism isn't about fame or talent or success. It's about loving someone else more than you love yourself. It's about sacrificing everything for the people you care about." Sarah was 9 years old, and she understood this truth better than I've understood it in 50 years of life. I've spent my career trying to heal the world through music, trying to bring people together, trying to make children happy. But Sarah showed me that sometimes healing the world means healing one person, one family, one heart at a time. She showed me that the smallest acts of love can have infinite value. I want to honor her memory by making sure Danny has every opportunity to live the full, beautiful life his sister wanted for him. Enclosed are documents establishing the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Trust. This trust will cover all of Danny's medical expenses for life, his education through any level he wishes to pursue, and provide financial support for your family so that Tom doesn't have to work 3 jobs anymore. I want Danny to grow up knowing his sister's love made all of this possible. I want him to become whatever he dreams of becoming, whether that's an artist, a scientist, an astronaut, or anything else his heart desires. But more than that, I want Danny to know the story of his sister's courage. I want him to understand that Sarah's letter didn't just save his life. It reminded me why I do what I do, why any of us are here. We're here to love each other, to lift each other up, to make sacrifices for people who matter. Sarah understood this at 9 years old. I'm only beginning to understand it now. Thank you for letting me be part of your family's journey, even for such a brief time. Thank you for trusting me with Sarah during her final days. It was an honor I'll carry with me forever. Please tell Danny that his sister was a superhero, not in a comic book way, but in the most real and important way. She saved his life with nothing but love and a letter. That's more powerful than anything I've ever accomplished. With deep respect and eternal gratitude, Michael Jackson. Jennifer collapsed into Tom's arms, both of them sobbing as they processed Michael's final gift. The trust he'd established was worth over $5 million, enough to ensure Danny complete care and give the family financial security for the rest of their lives. But more valuable than the money was the recognition of Sarah's sacrifice, the validation that her short life had mattered immensely. During the funeral service, Frank Dilio stood at the podium and shared the story of how Michael had received Sarah's letter, how he'd canceled tour rehearsals to help the family, how he'd stayed with Sarah during her final days. Most people in the chapel already knew the broad strokes of the story, but hearing it laid out in full made many realize the depth of Michael's commitment. The media is going to remember Michael for his music, his dancing, his controversies. Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. But I want you all to know that he was also a man who received a letter from a dying child and moved heaven and earth to honor her final wish. He sat beside Sarah's bed for 7 days, holding her hand, making sure she knew she was loved. That's who Michael Jackson really was underneath all the fame and noise. That's the man I knew, and that's the man Sarah Mitchell got to know in her final days. Danny sat between his parents in the front row, his small frame dressed in a dark suit that was slightly too large. He'd returned from Germany 2 days earlier, his treatment showing remarkable success. Already, his muscle strength was improving, his energy returning. Dr. Herman had been amazed at how quickly Danny was responding to the gene therapy, calling him a poster child for what the treatment could accomplish. But Danny's eyes were red from crying, and he clutched the stuffed dinosaur Sarah had given him months ago. He didn't fully understand death yet. Not really. He kept asking when Sarah was coming back, when she'd be done being an angel. His parents had tried to explain that heaven was forever, but 6-year-olds don't grasp forever. They only understand that the person they love is gone, and the absence hurts. After the service, as people gathered for the reception, a man approached the Mitchell family with a camera crew. He introduced himself as Martin Torres, a documentary filmmaker who'd been researching stories about Michael Jackson's charitable work. I know this is a difficult time, Martin said carefully, but I'd like to tell Sarah and Michael's story to the world, not in an exploitative way, but as a testament to what real compassion looks like. I think people need to hear this, especially now when everyone's focused on the sensational aspect of Michael's death. Would you be willing to participate? Tom and Jennifer looked at each other, having a silent conversation that only couples married for decades can have. Finally, Jennifer nodded. Yes, she said, but only if the focus is on Sarah. Michael would want that. He'd want people to know about her courage, not about him being some kind of savior. She saved Danny. Michael just made it possible. Over the following months, Martin Torres created a documentary called A Letter to the King that told the complete story of Sarah's letter, Michael's response, and the week he spent at her bedside. The documentary featured interviews with the Mitchell family, Dr. Chen, hospital staff, and Frank Dilio. It included footage of Sarah's drawings, her medical journey, and the remarkable recovery Danny was experiencing thanks to the treatment his sister had secured for him. The documentary premiered at a film festival 8 months after Michael's death and received a standing ovation. Critics called it a powerful reminder of humanity's capacity for compassion. More importantly, it inspired action. Donations poured into research funds for muscular dystrophy. Families facing similar situations reached out to the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Foundation, which Tom and Jennifer had established to help other children access experimental treatments. The story caught the attention of several celebrities who'd been friends with Michael. They organized a benefit concert in his honor, with all proceeds going to the foundation. Musicians who collaborated with Michael performed his songs. But the most powerful moment came when Danny Mitchell, now 7 years old and growing stronger every day, walked onto the stage. He carried a large canvas, a painting he created in art therapy. It showed two figures, a girl with angel wings flying above the clouds, and a boy standing on the ground below, looking up at her with one hand raised in farewell. The simple, childish style somehow captured the emotion of their story more powerfully than any professional artist could have. "My sister Sarah saved my life," Danny said into the microphone, his small voice amplified throughout the auditorium. "And Mr. Michael helped her do it. I'm gonna be an artist when I grow up, because Sarah wanted me to draw forever. And I'm gonna make pictures that make people happy, just like Mr. Michael made music that made people happy. That's how we keep them alive, by being the best versions of ourselves. That's what my mom says, and I think she's right." The audience erupted in applause, many crying openly at the wisdom coming from such a young child. In that moment, Sarah and Michael's legacy crystallized into something tangible and ongoing. Their story would continue to inspire, to motivate, to remind people that individual acts of kindness could change the world. 5 years later, Danny Mitchell was 12 years old and completely healthy. The gene therapy had worked beyond anyone's expectations, and his muscular dystrophy was in full remission. He attended a special school for gifted artists, his talent for drawing having blossomed into genuine skill. His room was covered with paintings and sketches, many of them featuring his sister as an angel watching over various scenes. Tom Mitchell had left his 3 jobs and now worked as a counselor helping families navigate the medical system when their children faced terminal illnesses. He used his own experience to guide others through the impossible decisions, the grief, the practical challenges that came with childhood disease. He became an advocate for expanded access to experimental treatments, testifying before Congress about how his son had only survived because of one man's generosity and his daughter's courage. Jennifer Mitchell had written a book titled Letters from Sarah that compiled her daughter's drawings, writings, and the story of a final act of love. The book became a bestseller, with readers around the world moved by Sarah's wisdom and selflessness. Jennifer donated all proceeds to the foundation, which had now helped over 50 children access life-saving treatments they otherwise couldn't afford. On the 5th anniversary of Sarah's death, the Mitchell family visited her grave along with several people whose lives had been touched by her story. Frank Dilio was there, older and grayer, but still devoted to honoring Michael's memory. Dr. Chen attended, having left clinical practice to work full-time with the foundation. And dozens of families who'd received help from the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Foundation came to pay respects to the little girl who'd started it all with one letter. Danny placed a new drawing at his sister's headstone. This one showed 3 figures, Sarah with angel wings, Michael Jackson dancing on clouds beside her, and Danny standing below them, surrounded by other children, all holding hands. Across the top, in his improved but still childish handwriting, he'd written, "Love never dies. It just changes form." Tom knelt beside his son and put an arm around his shoulders. "Your sister would be so proud of you. Danny, look at everything that's happened because she loved you enough to write that letter. Look at all these kids who are alive because of her courage." Danny nodded, understanding now in a way he couldn't at 6 years old. "Do you think Mr. Michael knows? About all the kids we're helping?" "I think they both know," Jennifer said, joining them at the grave. "I think they're watching, and I think they're happy. They started something that's going to keep going long after we're all gone. That's what real heroes do. They set things in motion that outlive them." As the sun set that evening, casting golden light across the cemetery, the gathered crowd shared stories about Sarah and Michael, about the unexpected ways their lives had intersected, about the ripple effects of compassion. Children who'd received treatment through the foundation ran and played nearby, their laughter a living testament to Sarah's sacrifice. Frank Dilio stood apart from the main group, tears streaming down his weathered face. He thought about Michael, about the complicated, troubled, brilliant man he'd known for decades. He thought about the media circus that had surrounded Michael's death, the endless speculation about his personal life, the way his legacy had been picked apart and debated. But standing here, watching Danny Mitchell, alive, healthy, thriving, Frank knew what Michael's true legacy was. It wasn't the record sales or the dance moves or the controversies. It was this: a boy who would grow up to be a man, who would create art and love people and maybe save someone else's life someday, all because his sister had loved him and a famous stranger had cared enough to help. "You did good, Michael," Frank whispered to the sky. "All the other stuff doesn't matter. This matters. This kid matters. You saved him and is going to do amazing things. Sarah made sure of that, and you made sure, Sarah. That's enough. That's more than enough." As darkness fell and people began leaving the cemetery, Danny took one last look at his sister's grave. He thought he saw something, just for a moment, a shimmer in the air above the headstone, like heat waves on summer pavement. And he could have sworn he heard music, faint and distant, like someone humming one of Michael Jackson's songs. But when he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the certainty that wherever Sarah and Michael were, they were together, watching over him and all the others their story had touched. Danny smiled and took his mother's hand, ready to go home, ready to keep living the life his sister had given him, ready to make her proud with every picture he drew and every kindness he showed. Because that was what heroes did. They didn't wear capes or fly or have superpowers. They loved each other fiercely enough to change the world, one letter at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one saved life at a time. Sarah Mitchell had been a hero. Michael Jackson had been a hero. And someday, Danny knew, he would be a hero too, carrying forward the legacy of love that had saved him. The story of a dying girl's letter and a famous man's response had become something larger than either of them, a reminder that in a world full of pain and injustice, individual acts of compassion still mattered immensely. That love, expressed authentically and without expectation of reward, could literally save lives. That sacrifice for others was the highest form of human achievement. And somewhere in the universe, where energy never dies but only transforms, two souls who briefly touched each other's lives continued their dance, their mission complete, their love eternal, their legacy unfolding across time in ways they'd never imagined but would have celebrated completely. Because in the end, that's what mattered most, not fame or fortune or even survival, but the connections we forge, the love we give, and the lives we change by simply choosing to care when caring costs us everything. Sarah Mitchell and Michael Jackson had both made that choice, and the world would forever be different because they had.